All right, welcome everyone. We are here with Rebecca Gubbels with the Small Business Development Center at UMKC and Susie Gilbert with Simmons Bank. Hopefully Kathy will be able to join us soon. We are figuring this out. We appreciate your patience, but we just wanted to give you guys a quick overview of what's available. We know a lot of you have questions, and so hopefully this will get those answered, and it's evolving constantly. So I'll hand it over to Rebecca and we can get started.
Thank you so much, Alyssa. The Small Business Development Center at UMKC is delighted to be partnering with you guys out in Lee Summit and all the work that you do to help develop the local economy and that kind of thing. And we are delighted to have been invited to work alongside our friends at Simmons Bank to get you some information. If you might consider scrolling down to the next slide.
One moment.
You can see that we are in hopes to be joined by the illustrious Kathy Hunter, who is the Senior Vice President of Commercial Lending at Simmons. Susie Gilbert with Simmons is one of Kathy's most trusted partners and is on with us now as well. And
I'm here. And Rebecca, sorry to interrupt you real quick. Alyssa, can you make the screen a little smaller so we can see the whole slide? Maybe just zoom out real quick. Yeah, sure. That'll be good.
Yeah.
And then, and thank you, Rebecca. We are so proud to partner with you as a resource. We direct a lot of people to the SBDC, and we'll talk a little bit later about how we're even directing you, people to you in this time when other people are directing, clients to support lines, but we want to make sure that they get the help that you provide, which is really invaluable.
Excellent. And we are sending people to you as well. So people with real information. That's kind of what we're working on here together. And thank you for making that slide a little smaller. I was about to give a Lone Ranger, or like the guy who always looked over the fence.
Wilson, like Wilson
yes.
from Home Improvement.
Absolutely. So let's dive into the information itself. If we could look at the next slide. Overall, what we're going to be talking about today is the CARES Act, which was signed on Friday of last week, which has provisions for something called the Paycheck Protection Program, as well as provisions for loan forgiveness. We're going to talk about the SBA disaster assistance. We're going to talk about documentation that people need to be putting together to not only apply, but then do well when evaluated. And then we'll cover some FAQs and then, of course, accept questions from y'all.
And as we go to the next slide, I just want to set this up. Our step one is what you can control right now. So we have a lot of stuff that's still details that are still getting worked out. We got a lot of clarification last night from the SBA on the Paycheck Protection Program, but we want to start with what you can do now, the things that are in your control over the next 6 months, because we know a lot is out of your control right now. So this might even center you.
Yeah, absolutely. So to think about, to Susie's point, to thinking about what it is that you can actually control, first things first, the people that you presently owe money to, whether short or long-term creditors, whether they're payables or longer-term debt, please reach out to them to see if there is an opportunity to lower your fixed expenses in the short term, right? That it should include your landlord and anyone else, like I said, that you owe fixed expenses to. Reach out, let them know what the circumstances are that you're in, and ask for ask them to work with you. We're all in the same boat together, and by and large, most people are being really cool. So definitely reach out to those you presently owe money to, whether it be actual debt or just a regular recurring expense that you're concerned about not being able to cover. On requesting restructure or short-term deferment for debt obligations, there is, that's related to the previous point, as part of this, the payments on existing SBA secured debt have been, there's part in the CARES Act to cover those payments in the short term, but you should reach out to your existing institution. Also, let's talk about receivables for a second. So if you are somebody who lets your customers buy now, pay later on some sort of receivable structure, please start by making sure that you're billing them promptly. Sometimes, you might do the work on a Tuesday and then you just do all the bills on Friday. Right now, please bill everyone the moment you are done completing work, and then give some thought to your collection practices. Right now might be a good time to consider offering some sort of small incentive if your customers have the capacity. Okay, sorry about that. If that was me, I apologize. If your customers have the capacity to be able to pay you more quickly, it might be time to consider offering some sort of small discount. Terms that you might have heard of are 210 net 30. That would be an example of 2% discount if customers can pay you in 10 days. Otherwise, the bill is due in 30. Right? So at a minimum, businesses need to be considering ways to follow up on receivables before they're due, and talk to customers, knowing that just like we just suggested that you reach out and ask for people to be flexible, you need to be simultaneously empathetic at the same time. So yes, conserve cash, but remember that to get through this short-term thing, that you're also, when dealing with receivables, you're managing long-term relationships with your customers. Before I continue, I just wanted to check and see if Kathy had a chance to join us, or Susie, if there's anything that you'd like to contribute at this point before I continue on. All right then. So then I want to talk a little bit more about the idea of, and actually I'm back on the previous slide, but I just wanted to give chances to for people to chime in on the topic of managing your cash flow. Obviously, please be holding off on major purchases. If you have inventory, can it be returned or exchanged with your vendor? Are there ways to incent customers to buy your current inventory using maybe discounting or some other incentives? Are there things that you can be doing with regards to changing your distribution methods? I know we've worked with customers who had creating e-commerce on their radar, and then we're going to get to it someday, and then have suddenly had to bump that up. And we've helped customers develop e-commerce sites over the last 2 weeks. Those kind of things. Are there ways that you can be doing curbside? Could you be doing local delivery? All of those kind of things as additional ways to bring in cash if you're able to. Being sure also to reach out to your business insurance agent and to be managing your payroll costs as best that you are able. Keeping in mind that your goal is to pay your bills as slowly as possible right now without incurring a negative consequence. That's the overarching concept. Making sure that you don't want to be miserly, but to use the phrase hoarding cash is where I would want you to be, knowing that the goal is to have 90 days of cash on hand to cover your complete operating expenses. All right, so let's move on to the next grouping of information. All right, so there are provisions inside of the CARES Act, there's many provisions in there. There are two different specific pieces that we want to cover collectively together. They include the Paycheck Protection Program, or PPP, and include some information about loan forgiveness. So let's dive into that information. So this is the information about the Paycheck Protection Program. And Susie, this particular route for financing relief comes from SBA preferred lenders like Simmons Bank. I'm happy to cover this information, but is this something that you would like to cover? I can do either way.
So I think, just to jump in right here, I think Susie's lost the ability to hear. I'm so sorry. Thank you guys for your patience. We are figuring the technology out. I think everyone's in a transition period with this. So yeah, Rebecca, just take the lead.
Sure. All right. So the Paycheck Protection Program at a high level is an effort by the federal government through the Small Business Administration's preferred lenders to help small businesses cover payroll costs during the time of this disaster. I hate using the word disaster, but that's really what it is, during this COVID disaster. So for the
Hey, can you hear me? I think I'm
can now.
back. I am back in
Excellent.
this business.
Excellent, Susie. Would you like to cover the Paycheck Protection Program as
Well,
an
yeah, I'll
SBA
tell you.
preferred lender?
Yeah, I'll tell you. I know we just got some new guidance on this last night, and I'm sorry because I was in and out, so I don't know what you have covered. And thank you everyone for being so patient. But we just got new guidance on this last night. We were telling people 4% for a 10-year term, and the big news in this that came out last night is it's 0.5% for 2 years. So the Paycheck Protection Program, the intent of it is to incent you to keep employees on your payroll. So you actually apply through an SBA preferred lender, which would be a financial institution. So I tell you to start with your bank. Simmons Bank is an SBA preferred lender. If you need our help, let us know. But this loan is to help you with your employee expenses, your payroll, your benefits, be those healthcare or retirement benefits, commissions, and to give you a loan to help you with that in the short term. And then we'll talk about forgiveness options in the long term. So this has forgiveness options available. You are to use this loan for your payroll, to maintain payroll, and to maintain working capital. You are an eligible business if you have 1 to 500 employees, sole proprietors, you're self-employed. This is to help you maintain your payroll. Jump in, Rebecca. I gave you a little break.
No, I appreciate that. Well, part of the important part of this is, to Susie, to your earlier point, in comparison to some other things that we're going to talk about as far as options as we progress, it's important to note the maximum loan amount on this is $10 million, which is the highest of the loan options that's available. 2.5 times your average monthly payroll, to Susie's earlier point, and that's going to be calculated by the bank. You're going to need to be gathering your payroll records.
We want 18 months of payroll.
Yep, 18 months of complete payroll records, and that includes bonuses, partner payments that come off your outside of the W-2 structure, dividends, all that kind of thing. Not dividends, that's the wrong word. Owner distributions, collect all of that information for the past 18 months and have that ready for your banker. And a portion of this structure through the Paycheck Protection Program, that if you keep your employees employed for 8 consecutive weeks after being, after funding, if you bring them back or keep them on for 8 consecutive weeks after funding through June 30th, that portion that you spent on payroll and payroll related expenses, that portion of these loans will be forgivable.
So Alyssa, we detailed this a little bit on slide 7. So what we're going to do is go to the next slide. We're going to take March through June of 2019, so your payroll records for that, and compare it to March through June 2020. And as long as you're year over year, you haven't made year over year reductions in FTEs or salary reductions of more than 25% of those earning less than $33,333 during that period, then that portion of the loan will be forgiven. So we are capping employees who make more than $100,000 at $33,333. That's a common question we get. Is the employee who makes over $100,000 excluded totally? We're saying we're going to cap that at $33,333.
We had a relevant question in the chat just a moment ago, asking what if I wasn't in business for this 18 months that you're talking about having payroll records for? If you were not in business on February 15th of 2019, this is being calculated based on your average payroll spend for the month of January 2020 and February 2020 averaged together. All right, can we go back to slide 7 real quick, make sure we didn't miss anything?
And I see that Kathy's on. Kath, can you talk?
Sure. Can you hear me?
Oh my goodness, yeah. All right, we are talking about Paycheck Protection Program, and we're just getting into the loan forgiveness portion.
Perfect. There's a couple of components that I think are really important or to be mindful of. So some of the questions that we've received so far as it relates to the forgiveness component is, what happens if I had an idle loan? Would that roll over or get consolidated with the P3 loan? And the answer is yes, it would, but not all of it has the ability to be forgiven. The idle loan allows you to borrow for other things that, so long, 6 months of working capital expense, fixed overhead, so more than the forgiveness component of the Paycheck Protection Program allows. So just kind of be mindful of that. But overall, no more than 25% of working capital or non-payroll costs can be included in the component for forgiveness. Another element that we always want to stress and make sure that people are aware of when you're comparing the P3 loan to the EIDL loan program is that the EIDL loan provides a 30-year repayment at 3.75%. Versus if there is a remaining balance after the loan forgiveness component, it would be restructured for an amortization over a 2-year period of time, and the interest rate on that would be at 0.5%. So while the interest rate is a very low number, it is repaid over a relatively short period of time. From a big picture standpoint, into trying to determine which one is the best one for you to look at, it's important that you be mindful of what that repayment expectation is once we get to the other side.
Absolutely. We've been talking to customers about how long if you're taking out a loan the size of a house, would you like to pay it back over 2 years or 30 years, right? And to be very mindful of that. So can we move on to the next, I think 2 slides.
And we just got a question in the chat. The question is, does the balance after forgiveness begin for 2 future years, or is the 6 months included in the 2 years from issuance?
It's my understanding that it would begin after the forgiveness period ends.
So we have 6 months of, okay, we have 6 months of deferment and then 2 years begins?
Yes.
Okay.
And so, Kathy, can I ask a question that came up in our team's morning call? So if the SBA is covering payments for the first 6 months and it's on a 2-year AM, does that make it basically 3/4 of the amount? You see what I'm saying? Less of forgiveness?
Yeah, so the way that, in my mind, that I've simplified it is, hopefully we have the money out the door by May 1st. We're going to evaluate 8 weeks of payroll once the money is dispersed to the client for the period ending June 30th. We're probably going to need 30 to 45 days from our customers or with our customers for them to gather those payroll reports and submit them to the bank and request that portion of forgiveness. The we'll transmit that information to the SBA. SBA will in turn ask the U.S. Treasury to remit payment to the customer through the bank. So the money is your money, but it's going to come to the bank to reduce your obligation with the bank. So with that being said, then that period would end. You know, we would hopefully get all that wrapped up before year end, and you would anticipate starting repayment in January or February of next year.
Kathy, can you talk a little bit about the tax implications of the forgiven portion of the loan?
Yeah, so Congress was very specific in addressing this concern. You know, and on an existing basis, the IRS has deemed the forgiveness of debt as a taxable consequence. However, the statute has specifically made it clear that this is not going to trigger a taxable consequence as it relates to the amount related to payroll. So if for some reason, you know, you default on the remaining portion, that has not been identified, but the amount that we're asking for payroll protection, so that component is not a taxable event.
That's helpful. Are there any other questions that make sense to ask here before we move on to talking about the SBA direct path for additional types of financing?
Yeah, we had one. When you're calculating those 18 months of payments, do you include the health and wellness benefits that you might offer your employees or any pension payments?
So you do need to include the benefits that you offered the customer or offered your employees in 2019. So health insurance is always a big one. It will not include the FICA tax. You know, that's something that you're obligated to pay. And it's other health and wellness benefits. I would, if it was me, I would submit it in the application, just and then let us determine as we receive additional information from the SBA if it's an eligible benefit to those employees for forgiveness.
And then I'll go ahead and say, just to wrap up that portion, the Paycheck Protection Program applications are starting to be accepted April 3rd. So you just have a couple days to get ready for that. It's first come, first serve. So we encourage you to jump on that and let us know if you need an application or an additional overview. And we'll send this presentation out following this call.
Absolutely. Well, then I think we should jump in now and start talking about the financing path direct from the SBA and their disaster assistance loans. And so if we could move on to our next slide. The Small Business Administration is offering loans direct from them called economic injury disaster loans. And you'll hear people call them EIDL loans or EIDL. You apply directly through the Small Business Administration on their website. At the beginning of this crisis, there was some questions, who's eligible and this, that, and the other. At this point, all states and US territories are eligible for these economic disaster loans as this virus is impacting us all. Eligible businesses, small businesses, nonprofits, and that are non-religious. Nonprofits being included is a big deal. That's typically a no-no inside of the Small Business Administration financing structure. This one is subject to size standards. There is a link on the SBA website to figuring out what size standard you're applicable to you based on your NAICS code, NAICS, North American Industrial Classification Code. If you don't know yours, it's okay. It's on the upper right-hand side of your tax return. The maximum amount on this is 6 months of working capital, capping out a 2 million max. This is a difference between the PPP loan and this direct from SBA EIDL loan in that you can get 10 million via PPP, 2 million max here. It's going to be calculated based on 6 months of working capital. If you applied for this already and applied before this weekend, you experienced a longer application process on the SBA website. Tail end of this weekend, they streamlined that process to include fewer upfront questions. Not fewer questions to eventually be underwritten, but just opening the top of the funnel that is the application website with fewer questions to get more people in. Two of the questions they're going to ask you are going to include what were your sales, and then they're going to ask you your average cost of goods sold, and they're going to use that information to calculate your operating expenses. The terms on this are, in comparison to where PPP landed, this interest rate is higher. This is 3.75. But again, the big issue that Kathy mentioned is that this has a 30-year term. So again, if you end up needing something, huge, do you want to pay it off over 30 years or 2 years? The loan purpose here can include working capital, payroll, existing debt payments, and accounts payable. You cannot refinance old debt with this though. So you can't be like, oh my gosh, I bought a delivery van for my truck in December and I'm paying like 7%. Can I just wrap that into this? No, that's not allowed. Like all of these, you're being asked to make a good faith certification that the loan is indeed necessary because you've actually been harmed by the COVID-19 crisis and that you're actually going to use the money for working capital needs. And so
no trips to the Bahamas, guys.
Yeah, unfortunately. Now, granted, getting on that airplane alone could physically harm you. So let's hope no one's going anyway, but yes. So let's look at the next slide. And I think that's going to lead us into some information about the cash advance. A lot of times you may have heard, oh, there's grants with this, there's grants with this. Here's the deal. They've changed the language on this from $10,000 grant to $10,000 cash advance. So what that means is when you're applying for the EIDL loans on the SBA's website, in the application process itself, one of the last questions is, would you like to have a $10,000 advance? You click yes, and they purport that 3 days later you will receive $10,000. Yeah, we've not had any clients receive it yet, but we'll see where we get. This advance need not be repaid, but they're changing the language to advance rather than the original wording of grant, because in an effort to keep this fast from an underwriting standpoint, the SBA is having to take a lot on faith. And that means that you're making a testimony that the information you've provided is true and accurate to the best of your knowledge, and that you're not committing fraud. This will not need to be repaid unless it is found that you are intentionally purporting a fraud, and then it'll get wrapped up into your larger loan and you will be required to pay it back. So there is an advance of up to $10,000. If you want it, click the last button on the application and don't commit fraud, and you won't have to pay that 10 grand back. Questions about that before I move on? That tends to be a spot where a lot of people want to ask things.
That happens really quick, right? That's within 3 days. Yes.
I have yet to see a client receive it in 3 days, but that is what's the timeline that's outlined in all of the guidance. Deep speed is what everyone is hoping for. And at the same point, we're all trying to address the small business needs of an entire nation. And so speed is the goal. 3 days is the goal. Let's cut them a little slack, but knowing that 3 days that's where they're shooting. If they're not doing it now, they will absolutely get there shortly.
I just wanted to clarify because it came up on the chat. These EIDL loans, you can apply directly online. The link is right there, the disasterloan.sba.gov/ELA. The Paycheck Protection Program applications will be through your financial institution.
We had a question on the chat as well. What if you don't need any more than that $10,000?
You still complete the whole application process, but the word is that that'll be the end. There'll eventually be loan documents for you to sign, that say that the $10,000 is an advance and that you don't have to pay the first 10 back and that your total loan amount was 10. So you will have to sign documentation for that, but that seems like the structure that they'll be putting together if all you need is 10. Other questions? Oh, sorry.
I'm sorry, one more question. If I have multiple businesses and I file a separate tax return for each of them, can I qualify to apply for more than one business? So can I do one of these for each business? I believe is the question.
It's a great question. The SBA is always going to ask about affiliates, parent companies, subsidiary companies, holding companies, and any company owned by the same group of managers and owners. And so you will disclose your affiliates, and then the expenses and payroll for both is typically grossed up for consideration, but they want to consider groups all together rather than onesie twosie. Kathy, that's something that I know that you know a lot about and can speak to as well.
Yeah, so I think the big question that we've heard frequently about is if you're in the fast food restaurant industry and you have a large number of employees, so it's $500,000 per location. So that's an example of a deviation from the size standards and the affiliation rules that the SBA has. Otherwise, my recommendation is that you put together a chart that shows all of the businesses you own, how many employees they have, what the revenue is, and the percentage of ownership that you control as an individual. And so that way we can just document at a higher level that the business is eligible from SBA size standards.
Do you recommend people apply for one or the other or both, or kind of depends on the situation?
So you cannot have both applications running simultaneous through the SBA's system. If you have an application that's currently in process with EIDL, prior to the bank entering that information into SBA's core system, you would need to have withdrawn that application. If your application has been approved on your EIDL loan and you've received funding on your EIDL loan, then it's my understanding prior to yesterday when we received updated information, but prior communication was that the EIDL loan would get consolidated into the P3 loan. Now that they've revised the repayment of the P3 loan, I'm wondering if that's still the case. You cannot double dip, so if your EIDL loan included labor expense, then it would not be duplicated. That portion would not be duplicated in the P3 loan.
And Kathy, is that something you can talk just briefly a little bit more about? Because so much of the information that many of us are seeing has to do with, yes, you can have both, but you can't use the funds for the same purposes. And so the guidance that it's one or the other and the SBA system conflict in the computer system, is that something you can talk a little bit more about, considering so many people are potentially misreporting that it's ability to double dip in two types of loans as long as you don't use it to cover two types of expenses?
Right. So, and this is one of the topics that we still need clarification from the SBA. So prior to yesterday, when they released the latest version of the P3 loan, the clear instructions were that we were to refinance the EIDL loan into the P3 loan. That portion that did not involve labor reimbursement would not be forgiven, and that it would eventually be structured to be repaid over a 10-year period of time. Yesterday afternoon, late in the afternoon, we received updates on the P3 program that showed that the interest rate had been reduced from 4% to 0.5%, and any portion that was not forgiven would be repaid over a 2-year period of time. And then it did allow for a portion of that forgiveness to include working capital needs not to exceed 25%. However, they didn't provide any clarification on if that would have been proceeds that ultimately were received originally through EIDL. So that's on my list to get clarification and additional information on. From a big picture standpoint, though, it's important that you think in terms of how your business operates. If my business is in the service industry, I'm probably pretty labor intense and may not have as much fixed overhead. However, if I'm in manufacturing, I might have fewer employees, but a lot of fixed overhead and working capital needs that, you know, are going to create more working capital needs, but less labor, you know, labor component of that working capital. So, you know, when you're walking through and figuring out which one program is the best to start with, you know, that's where I say just get out your checkbook and look at, you know, this is how much payroll was, and then this is how much I paid in rent, this is how much I have in utilities, this is how much I have in equipment debt, this is, you know, to kind of walk through the list and figure out if a large percentage of that monthly expenditure is more fixed overhead, not necessarily labor. The largest percentage is non-labor related, and that P3 program or that EIDL loan is probably the best way to start. You know, I realize that it doesn't have as big of a component for forgiveness, but its repayment is a lot more favorable to the business owner long term.
Absolutely. I think the slides proceed from here into some frequently asked questions, and maybe we can dive in there and continue to take questions from the chat as well.
Yeah, so we have another question on the chat. I'll advance here in a minute. So the $10,000 cash advance was not part of the original EIDL loans, correct?
Correct.
So if someone already has an SBA loan, would they be able to qualify for that if they've already been granted before that was enacted?
Yes, but you have to reapply. If you applied before the application, if you applied direct to the SBA and were approved before the format was simplified over this weekend, so I think it was late Sunday that the application process was simplified, then you do need to reapply. And there again, use that button at the end, $10,000 advance, yes, no. And I think there's an open form box where you would want to say received approval, secondary application for $10,000 advance. Just to be very clear to whatever human being ends up looking at your now required follow-up application for the $10,000 advance. With regards to navigating the online system at SBA altogether, this is a situation where you apply online, but please do not apply during standard business hours because everybody and their dog is applying during standard business hours. We're recommending that our clients do use the website, do pursue this path, but do it between 7 p.m. and 7 a.m. Additionally, do not use the Chrome internet browser. So if you're a Firefox person, or I think Mac people or Safari people, you know, what
Internet Explorer is good.
Yeah, there you go. That's the
one time Internet Explorer is good.
What's the joke is that Internet Explorer is the browser that everyone uses to download the browser they actually want.
Yep.
But in this case, you might want Internet Explorer because it's jiving beautifully with the SBA's website. Do apply as the operating company and do as Kathy recommends. Make sure you've already gridded out who owns what percentage of which things, all of that kind of information. Make sure you're aware of your affiliates. When you enter the name of your company, please make sure that you enter the name of your company exactly as it appears on your tax return. If there's a space, include a space. If it's capitalized, capitalize it. One of the issues historically with SBA disaster loan financing is hiccups on what's called a 4506T form. That's the form by which the SBA checks with the IRS that your tax records are accurate as have been reported. And anytime when two computer systems don't see things exactly the same, a human has to get involved. And the ideal outcome for you as an applicant is to make sure as few humans are necessary to get your application to the finish line. So do make sure you enter your information exactly as it appears on your tax returns, both personally and as a business. So my legal name is Rebecca. I do not go by Becky, but let's say that I did. I might fill out the thing, you know, Becky Gubbels. Ooh, that even hurt to hear out loud, but that would jack me up because my legal name is Rebecca. And I think on my tax return, it's Rebecca Lynn Gubbels, which is my middle name. So again, make sure and do that accurately and in the nicest possible way. The folks on the SBA support line are working hard. They brought in over 500 people from FEMA to try and man those phone lines. However, it is a lengthy process to get someone, and there's local folks like us at the Small Business Development Center that exist in real life to help you here locally.
That's exactly what I was saying earlier. Call Becky at SBDC. Avoid that support line if you can.
Sorry, that was a visceral reaction to hearing me call that. Yes, please call Rebecca and her amazing teammates at the Small Business Development Center. And in case it's helpful, we will send this out, but our office line is open. It's 816-235-6063.
I'm going to write that in the chat. 816-235-6060.
6063.
Okay.
Yep. All right, let's see what we got next in our slides.
So these essential documents are going to vary based off of whether you pursue the lending from EIDL versus P3. So I just wanted to make sure that we've got kind of a list of the things that you need to collect and be prepared to present. So payroll tax reports are critical if you're going to pursue the P3 program. Gather all of your 2019 records, plus your records for 2020 that you have in hand. Prior to us requesting forgiveness on your behalf for the labor portion or the paycheck portion, we'll have to gather those records through June 30th of 2020. Get copies electronically of all your tax returns. So scan them in, have them ready as a PDF so that you can share those. If your 2019 tax return isn't finalized, don't worry. We understand it's been extended. But you do need to go ahead and have hopefully a balance sheet and a profit and loss statement generated. So work with your accountant if you're waiting on some journal entries to post to close out QuickBooks, or ask your accountant to help to go ahead and get that generated and ready for you. Organizational documents are going to be critical for both loans. So we're looking for articles, and then depending on how you're formed, either bylaws or an operating agreement. In some states, a single member LLC is not required to have an operating agreement. So in that situation, you would just attest that you don't have one because you're the sole owner of that LLC. So don't fret if it doesn't exist, but just make a note to address it so that people don't think it's a missing document. It's just a document that's absent from your organization. Get together a record of the number of full-time employees you had as of February 15th, 2020. That's the start date for all of this. I would encourage people to go ahead and prepare 2020 projections. Don't spend an enormous amount of time. Make it a high-level overview. You can do it in an Excel spreadsheet. The reason why we're asking for this is you do need to be able to document that you have or that you anticipate you're going to incur hardship economically as a result of COVID-19. And that's the cleanest and the easiest way for you to do that. Statement of liabilities or a schedule of debt. That's important if you're pursuing the EIDL loan because they can use that to calculate the amount that you're eligible for. So it's going to increase the amount that you're available to receive. And then the IRS form 4506T form, that's that document that Rebecca and I talked about a bit briefly. that document can get collected on the back end, but if you've got that form handy and you're in the mood, you might as well fill it out and provide it with the rest of your package. Rebecca, is there anything else now that SBA has reduced their paperwork process for the EIDL loans that needs to be added or taken away from this list?
Not necessarily taken away. You do not have to, at application, submit a personal financial statement anymore for the EIDL process, but we are still recommending that clients get the SBA personal financial statement form and have that filled out, because we think that's a question that's coming before approval, after application, and before approval. They're just looking to minimize the amount of time that people are spending on the website because the website was being mobbed. So I think you're still going to get that question. If you can have that form filled out, included in your packet, much like Kathy just recommended for other things, I think that's wise.
If you want to flip to the next slide. Again, let's kind of go back to some of the frequently asked questions that we're hearing. Can I get both? Can I have an EIDL loan and a P3 loan? And the answer is yes, with more information to be provided. However, we do know that there can be no duplication in use of proceeds. So if you pursue a P3 loan and you've got labor expense in there, then you cannot include that labor expense in the EIDL loan. Again, today or prior to today, my understanding was the EIDL loan would get consolidated into the P3 loan. With the revisions that came out last night, I think that provision is going to change. So I would tell everybody more to come. The application process for a P3 loan is going to start on Friday with the banks. So I would expect most banks to go live on Monday. It's a phased-in approach. So if you're an independent contractor, that opportunity will not be available to you until April 10th. But any form of corporation or sole proprietor is available to start submitting applications to banks this Friday. On the loan forgiveness component, I think there's more clarification that we're waiting to receive. But the key is that we're going to look at your average monthly wages from February 15th, 2020 through June 30th of 2020 and compare it to the same period of last year. If you have furloughed employees or laid off employees and you choose to bring them back once you get the loan proceeds, then we would evaluate 8 consecutive weeks of payroll records to show that they have been brought back on for that component of eligibility for loan forgiveness to exist. So it's okay if you had to furlough or lay people off, as long as you bring them back on, and we can have 8 consecutive weeks to measure that. If you have employees that made more than $100,000 in 2019, it's our understanding as of yesterday afternoon that it will be capped at $100,000. So we're specifically going to be looking at $33,333 for that employee for this year.
Yeah, that's a big one, Kathy. Get a lot of questions about that. And so let's say you have a lower paid employee. Let's say their annual salary is $50,000, right? So you just cap it out at $33,333 for the higher paid folks. But can you paint a picture of how the people who have lower annual salaries, just kind of paint a picture? Let's say I have an employee who has a $50,000 a year salary. What would I submit for that?
So it's going to be included in those 941 records and the payroll records that you provide to the bank. You know, so we've got the ability of any employee that makes less than $33,333 for that period of time that we have to measure, plus their related benefits, to include in the forgiveness component.
Yeah, I think that's really great. I think a lot of entrepreneurs are daunted by that math and this, oh, that's just the number for my 100K people is satisfying. But then you're like, well, what about my less than 100K people? And so having those records and of both, to Kathy's point about payroll as well as health benefits and that kind of thing, can help you figure out what somebody's truly been paid for the affected period of time.
We encourage anyone who has additional questions to type those in the webinar chat, and I will read one now. Are there any incentives that you two ladies know about available to businesses to hire new employees during this time?
There's some tax credits that will be available to you that were part of the CARES Act. But I would encourage you to reach out with your tax advisor to learn more about. And they're really generous.
I have another question on the chat. Just to clarify, with those economic injury disaster loans, you can use them if you say you took out a loan on your business, years ago. You can use that money to pay the loan, but you cannot use it to refinance for a lower rate, correct?
Correct.
So the SBA has a different provision that was approved as part of the CARES Act, where they are going to automatically offer a deferment of your SBA loan for a period of time. So there's no need, if it's an SBA loan, to include that in the EIDL application.
Yeah, but general gist, so your SBA loan payments should be covered by the SBA during this time, but no, you cannot refinance old loans and just get a super rad rate.
If it was a private loan, you would still be able to use that EIDL loan to make the payment on the private loan, correct?
Correct. But like we're advising, please reach out to any private lender and ask them to work with you during this time as part of the step one of this whole thing, which is control your own cash flow, right? So please be independently reaching out to any private lenders and asking for a way to work together during this time. And then yes, to the core question, can EIDL be used to cover those payments, private debt during this time? Yes.
Are there any other questions from our attendees?
I have a question for you, Alyssa. How do you want to make this available to everybody who is, I know you guys have at the Lee Summit EDC have been really good about putting out email blasts, sending out the latest information, the latest resources to help your constituency.
Yeah.
Can you talk to us about that?
Yeah, definitely. I have intended to record this webinar. As we discovered earlier, we're still working through the technical stuff, but I think I did it right. So I will be sending out that recording after this webinar, and hopefully also be able to put it up on our resource page, leesummit.org/COVID-19.
Awesome. Can you scroll down? I included the emails. Oh, let's talk about things we can control, Kath.
Yeah. So today we're going to focus on hoarding cash, and then because that's in your control today. But then understand that these relief programs are first come, first served. So don't wait. And I realize that some of this information is fluid and it's subject to change in opinion or thought as additional information is learned. But let's go ahead and be prepared to make decisions quickly as more information is provided. And understand that we're going to be flexible and go with the flow as additional insights and knowledge is shared that might change your course of action. Be broad in thinking about what your options are. So, again, I know that somebody says the word free and you automatically say that's the one I want. But think about, long-term, what's going to create the most sense of security for the business. And then get prepared. So today start getting the financials in order, start working on that payroll record, and think about doing those projections with that glass half empty approach. I know it's not something that's easy for an entrepreneur to do. They tend to be overly optimistic or always optimistic. But this is the time that you can share that story that is not a glass, that has a bit of a more glass half empty approach, so that you can make sure that you can capture the most that is going to be made available.
And kind of to what you touched on previously, Kathy, we just got a question in from someone who says they have a 90-day cash reserve. What do you recommend they do since they're not in immediate need?
I would still encourage them to get that application in, because it is a first come, first serve situation. Both of these loan programs have no prepayment penalty. So, you know, if you want to look at it as, okay, worst case scenario, this may happen. It hasn't happened yet though. So I'm going to plan in advance and get the money. And then 6 months from now, if I find that I got through it much better than I planned for, then I'll just give it back. I can prepay it without penalty on both the idle loan or any component that was not forgiven within the P3 loan.
Great.
Kathy, sorry to interrupt. Kathy, can you give some guidance? I've heard some people talk about kind of the struggle or how, the question is how best to show the economic impact that the disaster has had on your business, because they just don't know how bad it will be in the coming months. So how, do you have any guidance for making those projections on how exactly it will impact?
I'm going to let Rebecca jump in on that one, since she's working much closer with customers today on how to forecast and anticipate and prepare.
Absolutely. Thanks, Kathy. So step one, let's measure what your sales for this, let's see, it's, what day is it? Oh, it's April now. It's April Fool's Day. No joking, please. Like, you know what your sales were in April of 2019. And you know, or we'll just use March. You know what your March 2019 sales were, and you've seen what your March 2020 sales were. Knowing that you were on, let's say you're on a, I don't know, 5% year-over-year growth trajectory, but your March is down 30%, and you were probably, some businesses were still open for part of March. It is completely reasonable to say I had normal traffic for 2 weeks, and then I had no traffic for 2 weeks, and I'm down 30%. I think my overall sales are going to be down 60 to 70%, and then project that for the period of time that this is likely to be a thing. Right? And so we're all in Kansas City on mandatory stay in your house order through April 30th. I don't think everybody's gonna be like, oh my gosh, it's May 1st. Let's all go back to our completely normal lives. And so then how long do we think, based on medical projections, that we'll probably still be in our homes? And then how long do you think it'll take before people decide to spend money on your thing, right? If you're a restaurant, that's gonna be very different than if you're manufacturing custom office furniture, right? So you need to use some of your own market intelligence and awareness of human behavior, but it's not going to be, I think we can rule out, oh my gosh, it's May 1st and everything's magically back to normal. One of the purposes of the Small Business Development Center is to give you an actual person to talk about your particular business situation with and help you make some best educated guesses about what may happen for your industry. And so we are here to help you specifically with projections and narrative creation on as you get ready to go through these loan processes. Hopefully that's enough to let you know that it's best educated guess, but let's not be silly, and we'll figure it out together.
Great. I have another question that came over the chat for the PPP loan. It's capped at the $100,000. Is that salary only, or does that also include benefits?
We haven't received clarification on that yet. My educated guess would be salary plus benefits. But I would encourage you to include those records with the application, that by the time we receive the clarification, you're ready to go.
And sorry, I have the tornado sirens going off in the back. But let's see, we just got a couple. Sorry, I lost my place actually. Rebecca, are you available for appointments to discuss more in depth for people's specific situations?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Myself and the person you're seeing today, but I am just one member of a team of 9 that does this very thing for folks in the Kansas City area. You can reach us, our email, my email's on the last slide, but the way to make sure you get the fastest service, because waiting for me is a bit of a trick, is to reach out to the phone number we gave you. So there's my email. But also you can call the number 816-235-6063. That's our main line. Or you can go to our website, which is SBDC, Small Business Development Center. So S as in Sam, B as in boy, D as in development, C as in center. That was a weird combo. SBDC@umkc.edu, and use the contact us form. That goes to our triage person, making sure that that you're getting hooked up with the absolute fastest member of our team, rather than being in the queue for me, which is hit or miss these days.
Rebecca, I think I could just be your laugh track. I feel like I'm just your laugh track.
I'm glad somebody besides me thinks I'm funny, because I am one of those horrible people who laughs at my own jokes.
On the PPP loan, do you have to have all your employees go to work, back to work, or can it be a scaled down workforce?
If there is a reduction in your workforce, the amount that's forgiven will be reduced. And I believe the threshold is you could have a reduction up to 25%.
Yeah, and Kathy, to clarify, that reduction is for the forgiveness portion, not for what funds can be allotted to you on the front end, correct?
That is correct.
And one more question. The EIDL loan, just to clarify, is for all business expenses, and you can also use that on your rent and payroll, correct?
Correct.
All right, well, I think we have gone through all the questions. Like I mentioned, my intent was to record this, so as long as all goes well, I'll share the recording. And at the very least, I will be sharing the slides on our website and through email, so look out for that. I'll also share the phone number, Rebecca, that you provided. And yeah, feel free to reach out to any of us. And we will hopefully be able to get you taken care of. And thank you guys so much one more time. Thank you to Simmons Bank and to Rebecca for offering this information. It's, you know, it's a crazy time. And like you mentioned, the information is changing.